The quietest heartbreak is the one that makes your own home feel like it belongs to someone else. I found the note before I even noticed the silence. It rested beside a coffee mug that still carried the faint warmth of the morning, as if the man who had written those few sentences had only stepped outside for a moment instead of walking out of my life. My name is Claire Bennett. I am 48 years old, and after 23 years of marriage, I discovered that a life can fall apart without a single raised voice. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor exactly as it had every morning for years. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and lemon dish soap. The old clock above the pantry continued ticking with perfect confidence, refusing to acknowledge that time had suddenly become divided into before and after. I unfolded the paper with hands that no longer felt entirely like my own. There was an apology. There was a promise that leaving was easier than pretending. There was no explanation large enough to carry the weight of everything we had shared. I wandered through the house as though I were seeing it for the first time. His closet was half empty. The suitcase he always used for business trips was gone. The wedding photograph hanging above the fireplace remained perfectly straight, smiling at a future that no longer existed. I had spent most of my career designing beautiful homes for other families. I knew how to arrange furniture, balance light, and choose colors that made people feel safe. Yet somehow I had failed to notice that my own marriage had become a room where neither of us truly lived anymore. My phone vibrated sharply against the kitchen counter. The caller ID belonged to my attorney. His voice sounded unusually careful. "Claire, I need you to listen before you react. We uncovered financial documents suggesting your house was pledged as collateral for several business obligations." I frowned in confusion. "That cannot be right. I never signed anything." "That is exactly why I am concerned," he replied. "Please do not sell the property, refinance it, or sign any paperwork. We believe important information was kept from you." When the call ended, I looked around the quiet house one last time. Every room carried memories, but none of them offered comfort anymore. I packed a single suitcase with sweaters, jeans, comfortable shoes, and the watercolor set I had not touched in nearly 20 years. I did not know why I packed the paints. Perhaps some forgotten part of me refused to stay behind. I searched online for somewhere far enough away that my thoughts might finally slow down. A lakeside cottage appeared with one unexpected vacancy after a cancellation. 90 miles from home. I booked it before fear could convince me otherwise. Rain followed me almost the entire drive. Busy highways slowly gave way to narrow country roads lined with towering pine trees and weathered wooden fences. The farther I traveled, the quieter the world became. By late afternoon, I pulled into the gravel driveway of a small white cottage overlooking a peaceful lake. Gentle waves shimmered beneath gray clouds while a cool breeze carried the scent of cedar across the porch. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside expecting nothing but solitude, and immediately froze. Another woman stood near the stone fireplace arranging camera equipment into neat canvas bags. She looked up at the exact same moment. We stared at one another in complete surprise until she slowly lifted a printed reservation confirmation, glanced toward my suitcase, and offered an apologetic smile. "I have a feeling," she said softly, "that someone accidentally rented this cottage to both of us." I stood in the doorway for a long moment, my suitcase still in my hand while the stranger waited with remarkable patience. The cottage felt impossibly quiet except for the soft crackle of a fire glowing inside the stone fireplace and the gentle rhythm of rain tapping against the windows. Neither of us seemed eager to break the silence first. Finally, I managed a nervous smile. "I think we should compare our reservations." She nodded immediately and handed me the printed confirmation. I opened the reservation email on my phone. Every detail matched. The address, the arrival date, even the cottage number. Only the confirmation codes were different. We called the rental office together, placing the phone on speaker while soft instrumental music played during the wait. Nearly 20 minutes passed before a tired manager answered with an apology that sounded as though it had already been repeated dozens of times that afternoon. A booking system update had duplicated several reservations across the area. Every nearby cabin, motel, and bed and breakfast within nearly 50 miles was completely booked until Monday morning. The manager apologized again, offered a refund, and admitted there was simply nowhere else available. I looked toward the front door. Driving back meant returning to a house that no longer felt like home. Remaining here meant trusting someone whose name I did not even know. Before I could speak, the woman quietly broke the silence. "There are 2 bedrooms," she said. "1 bathroom but plenty of space. If you are comfortable, we can simply share the cottage for the weekend. We do not have to be anything except respectful roommates." Something about the calm certainty in her voice made the impossible situation feel strangely manageable. "I am Claire," I said, finally setting my suitcase on the floor. She smiled warmly and extended her hand. "Evelyn Brooks." Her handshake was steady and brief, the kind offered by someone who never tried to impress anyone. We quietly divided the cottage without needing many words. I chose the smaller bedroom overlooking the pine trees while Evelyn carried her camera bags into the room facing the lake. The arrangement felt surprisingly natural, almost as though the cottage had always expected 2 strangers instead of 1. Hunger eventually reminded me that I had skipped breakfast and lunch. When I wandered into the kitchen searching for a glass of water, Evelyn was unpacking groceries from a canvas tote filled with fresh vegetables, homemade bread, soup ingredients, strawberries, and a small apple pie from the local bakery. She looked up and laughed softly. "I always shop as though someone unexpected might join me." I raised an eyebrow. "Does that happen often?" "Not usually," she admitted with a smile. "Would you help me make dinner anyway?" I surprised myself by saying yes, without hesitation. Soon I was chopping carrots while she stirred soup scented with rosemary, thyme, and roasted garlic. The familiar rhythm of preparing a meal beside another person settled something restless inside me. We spoke about ordinary things. She traveled across the country photographing forgotten towns and quiet landscapes. I designed homes where families hoped beautiful rooms could create beautiful memories. Neither of us mentioned broken marriages. Neither of us asked questions that belonged to another day. After dinner we washed the dishes together, standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the warm kitchen light. Reaching for the same towel at exactly the same moment, our fingers brushed lightly before we both stepped back with quiet embarrassment. The touch lasted no more than a second, yet I realized it was the first completely unexpected smile I had shared since my world had quietly unraveled. As evening settled across the lake, Evelyn opened the back door and stepped onto the wooden porch. I joined her, wrapping my sweater tighter against the cool breeze. Across the still water, the last streaks of sunlight faded into deep shades of blue and silver. Evelyn rested her hands on the porch railing and looked toward the horizon. "If the sky stays clear tonight," she said gently, "the sunrise tomorrow is worth waking up for." I followed her gaze across the peaceful lake, and for reasons I could not yet explain, I found myself hoping I would still be standing beside her when morning finally arrived. Morning arrived quietly, carried in on pale golden light that slipped through the bedroom curtains before my alarm had the chance to ring. For a brief moment I forgot where I was, and the familiar weight pressing against my chest seemed lighter than it had the day before. Then I remembered the cottage, the stranger sleeping in the room across the hallway, and the life I had left 90 miles behind. When I stepped into the kitchen, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted me before a single word was spoken. Evelyn stood by the window wearing a soft gray sweater, her hair loosely gathered as she watched mist drift across the lake. 2 travel mugs rested beside a small paper bag from the local bakery. She turned when she heard my footsteps and smiled with the easy warmth of someone who never forced kindness. "Good morning," she said. "The sky stayed clear. I thought you might still want to see the sunrise." I nodded before I could overthink the answer. We carried our coffee and warm cinnamon rolls along a narrow trail winding through towering pine trees where cool morning air smelled of cedar, damp earth, and wildflowers. Tiny drops of dew sparkled across the grass while birds welcomed the day from hidden branches overhead. After a short walk we reached a wooden overlook stretching above the calm lake. Thin ribbons of mist floated across the water, soft enough to blur the distant shoreline into watercolor shades of blue and silver. Evelyn rested her camera on the railing without lifting it to her eye. "You are not taking photographs?" I asked. She smiled while watching the horizon brighten. "Some mornings deserve witnesses instead of cameras." I wrapped both hands around my coffee and listened to the quiet rhythm of water touching the dock below. The silence between us did not feel uncomfortable. It felt peaceful, as though neither of us expected the other to fill every empty moment with conversation. After several minutes she spoke again. "The first time I came here, I believed changing places would change my life. She laughed softly at herself. Eventually I realized beautiful places only remind us that we still have the power to change ourselves. Her words lingered inside me long after she stopped speaking. We wandered into the nearby lakeside town later that morning, passing flower baskets hanging from old brick storefronts and neighbors greeting one another by name. Evelyn paused to admire handmade pottery, chatted with an elderly florist arranging fresh lilies outside her shop, and smiled at nearly everyone we met. Watching her move through the town made me realize she noticed people the same way artists notice light. Eventually we stepped into a small independent bookstore with polished wooden floors and shelves overflowing with novels, travel journals, and art collections. While Evelyn browsed photography books, I found myself standing before a display of blank journals. One simple leather notebook caught my attention, for embossed words covered the front. "Begin where you are." I gently traced the letters with my fingertips. "That one seems to have been waiting for you," Evelyn said as she quietly appeared beside me. I smiled without looking away from the cover. "You sound very certain." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Not certain. Hopeful." As we walked toward the register, the narrow aisle brought us unexpectedly close. Our shoulders brushed for only a heartbeat before we instinctively stepped apart, exchanging an awkward smile neither of us seemed eager to lose. At that exact moment my phone vibrated inside my coat pocket. A message from my attorney appeared across the screen. "We uncovered additional financial records. Please call me as soon as possible." My smile disappeared almost instantly. Evelyn noticed the change in my expression but never asked to see the message. Instead she quietly placed the last warm cinnamon roll into my hand and said, "Whatever you are about to hear, do not forget that difficult mornings are still allowed to end with something sweet." The message from my attorney stayed on my screen the entire drive back to the cottage, but I could not bring myself to return the call immediately. Something inside me wanted to hold on to the quiet morning just a little longer before reality found me again. Evelyn seemed to understand without my saying a word. She unlocked the front door, carried the bookstore bag inside, and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone on the porch with the lake stretching peacefully before me. I finally pressed the call button. My attorney answered almost instantly. "Claire, we reviewed another batch of financial records this morning," he said carefully. "There are more documents than we expected. Your husband refinanced portions of his business debt several times. We also found paperwork requiring a witness signature. I am sending everything to your email now. Please look through it whenever you are ready." My phone vibrated before he even finished speaking. A folder filled with scanned documents appeared in my inbox. "Is there anything else I should know?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "Only this. Some signatures are difficult to identify. If any name looks familiar, let me know." The call ended, leaving me alone with the sound of wind moving through the pine trees. I opened the first document but quickly realized the legal language blurred together beneath tired eyes. I slipped the phone into my pocket instead. Whatever answers waited inside those files could survive another hour. When I stepped into the kitchen, the comforting aroma of homemade tomato soup filled the cottage. Evelyn stood by the stove stirring the pot slowly while soft jazz played from an old portable speaker resting on the windowsill. She looked over her shoulder and smiled. "I thought soup seemed appropriate after all that rain yesterday." I laughed quietly. "You have an unusual talent for knowing exactly what people need." She shrugged with gentle modesty. "Sometimes kindness is simply paying attention." After lunch she asked if I would walk with her to an old oak tree overlooking the western side of the lake. Local residents often gathered there to watch the afternoon sunlight filter through the branches. The trail climbed gently uphill until the lake opened beneath us in shimmering shades of blue and green. Leaves whispered softly above our heads while sunlight painted moving patterns across the grass. Evelyn lifted her camera for the first time that day. "May I?" she asked. I instinctively reached for my hair, suddenly self-conscious. "I have never liked having my picture taken." "Then I will not photograph the person you think everyone sees," she replied. "I will wait for the person who forgets the camera is here." We talked instead. About childhood dreams. About unfinished paintings hidden in closets. About places we still hope to visit before growing old. Somewhere between one story and the next I laughed without thinking. The sound surprised even me. A gentle click echoed from the camera. Evelyn lowered it almost immediately. "I am sorry," she said. That smile deserved to exist. She showed me the image on the display. For several silent seconds I could not recognize the woman looking back at me. Her eyes looked lighter. Her shoulders seemed relaxed. She appeared peaceful instead of exhausted. "That cannot be me," I whispered. Evelyn looked at the photograph once more before meeting my eyes. "I think it has always been you." My phone vibrated again. Another email from my attorney had arrived with one line added to the subject. "Witness signature successfully identified. Please review page 14 immediately." My heartbeat quickened as I opened the attachment. Slowly I scrolled through contracts, legal forms, and notarized statements until page 14 finally appeared. Near the bottom of the document, beneath a witness line, one handwritten surname stood out with startling clarity. Foster. I stared at the signature, then slowly lifted my eyes toward Evelyn as she adjusted the camera strap resting across her shoulder. My eyes remained fixed on the signature while the afternoon breeze gently stirred the branches above us. Foster. The letters seemed to grow heavier every time I looked at them. My heartbeat slowed into the strange numbness that arrives just before panic. I raised my head carefully. Evelyn was standing only a few feet away, reviewing photographs on the back of her camera with the peaceful concentration I had admired all morning. Nothing about her expression suggested guilt. Nothing about her kindness fit the fear beginning to settle inside me. Yet the name on the document refused to disappear. I quietly locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket before she could notice the change in my face. "Everything all right?" she asked, her smile gentle and sincere. I forced one of my own. "Just another message from my attorney." The words tasted unfamiliar as they left my mouth. I had never enjoyed hiding the truth, but I suddenly needed time to understand what I had seen before asking impossible questions. We began walking back toward the cottage, the narrow trail winding through tall pine trees whose shadows stretched longer across the forest floor. Earlier that same path had felt peaceful. Now every step seemed unusually quiet. Evelyn noticed the silence but never pressured me to explain it. Instead she pointed toward a family of deer grazing near the edge of the trees. "They usually disappear before anyone notices them," she said softly. I looked in the direction she indicated, but my thoughts remained trapped on page 14 of a legal document. Back at the cottage, Evelyn excused herself to organize the photographs she had taken that afternoon. I remained on the porch overlooking the lake until the sound of the screen door closing behind her faded into the distance. Only then did I reopen the email. I enlarged the witness signature and studied every curve of every letter. Foster. Beneath it appeared a printed first name that was partially blurred by the scan. The last few letters were visible. Lynn. My chest tightened. Evelyn. I immediately called my attorney. He answered after the second ring. Claire, did you find the signature? Yes, I whispered. The last name is Foster. The first name looks like Evelyn. He paused before responding. We are still confirming the identity. The scanned copy is not perfectly clear. Do you know someone by that name? I looked through the living room window where Evelyn sat at the dining table carefully cleaning one of her camera lenses beneath the warm glow of a small lamp. I met someone yesterday, I admitted quietly. She is staying at the same cottage. My attorney remained silent for several seconds. Please do not confront her until we verify everything. A witness signature alone does not necessarily indicate wrongdoing. I promised I would wait, but waiting felt impossible. After ending the call, I stayed outside until the evening sky faded into shades of lavender and deep blue. Eventually Evelyn opened the back door carrying 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea. She handed one to me without asking whether I wanted it. You have looked 1,000 miles away ever since we left the oak tree, she said gently. Would you like to talk? I wrapped both hands around the warm mug, searching for words that refused to come. She remained beside me in complete silence, allowing the quiet to breathe instead of filling it. That simple patience somehow made the unanswered question even heavier. As darkness settled across the lake, my phone vibrated one final time. A new email from my attorney appeared across the screen. Subject: Additional records located. Possible photographic evidence attached. My pulse quickened as I slowly opened the message, knowing that whatever waited inside might forever change the way I looked at the woman standing quietly beside me. My thumb hesitated above the attachment for several long seconds before I finally opened it. A grainy photograph slowly filled the screen. At first I noticed only a conference room, a polished wooden table, and several folders spread across the surface. Then my attention settled on the woman standing near the far corner of the room. She held a camera bag over one shoulder, while an attorney pointed toward a stack of documents waiting to be signed. My breath caught. Even though the image was several months old and slightly blurred, I recognized her immediately. Evelyn. I lowered the phone before she could see the photograph. My mind raced through every conversation we had shared since arriving at the cottage. Every quiet smile. Every thoughtful gesture. Every peaceful sunrise. None of it matched the fear growing inside me, yet the evidence resting in my hand refused to disappear. Evelyn looked toward me from the porch railing where she stood watching evening settle across the lake. "You have been somewhere else all afternoon," she said gently. "Did your attorney find something important?" I swallowed carefully. "He found another document." She waited without interrupting. The silence stretched between us until I finally forced myself to speak. There was a witness signature. Her expression remained calm. "All right." I looked directly into her eyes. The last name was Foster. For the first time since we met, I watched surprise replace her quiet confidence. She frowned slightly, searching her memory instead of defending herself. "Foster is my last name," she answered honestly. "I know." I unlocked my phone and handed it to her without another word. She studied the photograph in complete silence. Her eyes moved from the image to the signature beneath it, then back again. A slow breath escaped her lips. "I remember this room," she whispered. "Not because of your husband, because it was one of the strangest assignments I ever accepted." I felt my heartbeat quicken. "Assignment?" She nodded slowly. "About 9 months ago, a commercial photography client asked me to photograph several office properties before refinancing meetings. One afternoon, another witness failed to arrive on time. The attorney asked whether I could simply verify identities after the meeting ended, so they could complete the paperwork. I signed as an independent witness, packed my equipment, and left. I never read the contracts. I never knew the people involved beyond their first names. I searched her face for hesitation but found only quiet confusion. "I did not recognize your husband's name yesterday," she continued softly. "If I had, I would have told you immediately." Before I could answer, my phone rang again. "My attorney." I answered almost instantly. "Claire," he said. "We confirmed the witness identity. Please listen carefully before making assumptions. Evelyn Foster was hired through an outside photography agency. She had no business relationship with your husband. She was not involved in any financial decisions. She signed only as an independent witness after another scheduled witness became unavailable." Relief arrived so suddenly it almost hurt. "Are you completely certain?" I asked. "Completely," he replied. "In fact, her testimony may actually strengthen your case because she had no connection to any of the parties." The call ended, leaving only the quiet sound of wind moving across the water. I slowly lowered my phone and looked at Evelyn. "I am sorry," I whispered. She offered the gentlest smile I had ever seen. "You were trying to protect yourself," she said. "After everything you have lived through, I would have asked the same questions." Before I could respond, distant headlights appeared through the pine trees, climbing the gravel road toward the cottage. A dark sedan rolled to a slow stop beneath the porch light. The driver's door opened, and the moment I recognized the familiar way he stepped from the car, every peaceful feeling inside me disappeared. Daniel had found me. Daniel closed the car door gently behind him and stood beneath the porch light without taking another step. The years we had spent together suddenly felt very far away. He looked older than he had only a few days earlier, as though carrying secrets had quietly stolen every ounce of certainty from his face. Evelyn remained near the cottage door, giving me the space to decide whether this conversation belonged only to my past. I slowly walked toward the edge of the porch until Daniel and I stood several feet apart. Neither of us reached for the other. Neither of us pretended this was anything except the ending we should have faced long ago. He held a large envelope against his chest with both hands. "Thank you for seeing me," he said quietly. I folded my arms against the cool evening air. "You already left once without asking whether I wanted to see you again." He lowered his eyes. "I know." The silence stretched between us while crickets sang from the tall grass surrounding the lake. Finally, he placed the envelope on the porch railing instead of trying to hand it directly to me. "Everything is inside," he said. "Every loan application, every refinancing agreement, every email, every financial statement. There are no more hidden accounts. There are no more lies." I looked at the thick envelope but made no move toward it. "Why now?" He drew a slow breath. "Because I spent months trying to save my business, and somewhere along the way I stopped trying to save my marriage. By the time I realized the difference, I had already destroyed both." His honesty carried no anger, only exhaustion. "The business began collapsing almost 2 years ago," he continued. "I kept believing one more loan would solve everything. When the bank stopped approving applications, I used the house without telling you. I convinced myself I would fix it before you ever found out." I closed my eyes briefly. "You decided for both of us." "Yes," he answered immediately. "That was the worst mistake I ever made." A gentle breeze crossed the lake, carrying the scent of cedar between us. Daniel glanced toward Evelyn, who still stood quietly beside the cottage without interrupting. "She had nothing to do with any of this," he said firmly. "I remember her now." The attorney brought in an independent witness after the scheduled witness canceled. She arrived, confirmed identities, signed where she was instructed, and left with her camera equipment. She never spoke to me beyond introducing herself. She never knew what those documents contained. I looked back toward Evelyn. She met my eyes but remained exactly where she was, allowing me to hear every word without influence. Daniel followed my gaze before quietly smiling to himself. "Do you know what I noticed the moment I arrived?" he asked. I remained silent. "She listens to you. Really listens. I stopped doing that years ago." His voice grew softer. "You deserve someone who sees you before she sees your responsibilities." Those words settled somewhere deep inside me because they were painfully true. "I am not here asking for another chance," he continued. "There is no version of this story where I earned that. I only wanted to tell you the truth myself before the lawyers finished telling it for me." He stepped backward toward the sedan. "I asked your attorney where you had gone because there was one thing I could not leave unsaid. I am sorry, Claire. Not because I was caught. Because I forgot how to love you with honesty." He returned to the driver's seat, closed the door gently, and drove away without looking back. The red taillights disappeared beyond the curve of the road until darkness quietly reclaimed the gravel driveway. I stood motionless beneath the porch light before finally turning around. Evelyn was still waiting with the same patient expression she had carried since the moment we met. She did not ask what had been said. She simply opened the screen door and held it for me. I walked toward her without hesitation this time. As I reached the top step, our hands found one another naturally. And for the first time since my entire world had unraveled, moving toward someone felt infinitely safer than watching someone leave. The next morning I woke before sunrise without the familiar weight pressing against my chest. The cottage remained wonderfully quiet, filled only with the soft whisper of wind moving through the pine trees. Outside my bedroom window, for a few peaceful seconds I simply listened. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt gentle. I slipped on my sweater and stepped quietly into the hallway. Evelyn's bedroom door stood slightly open. Her room was empty. For one brief moment an old fear returned. I wondered if she had left before dawn, deciding that my complicated life was more than anyone should willingly carry. Then I noticed 2 steaming mugs resting on the kitchen counter beside a folded note written in neat handwriting. "Sunrise. End of the dock." I smiled before I even realized I was smiling. Carrying both mugs carefully, I followed the narrow wooden walkway stretching across the calm lake. Evelyn stood at the very end of the dock with her camera hanging untouched from one shoulder, while the first soft colors of morning slowly spread across the horizon. Pink blended into pale gold before dissolving into endless shades of blue reflected across the still water. She turned when she heard my footsteps and accepted the second mug with a grateful smile. "I was hoping you would wake up before the best part," she said quietly. We stood together watching the sun slowly rise above the distant trees. Neither of us hurried to fill the silence. It had become one of the things I treasured most about being beside her. Eventually Evelyn reached into her canvas bag and removed a small package wrapped carefully in brown paper. "I wanted you to have this," she said. I unfolded the paper slowly. Inside rested the photograph she had taken beneath the old oak tree. I stared at the woman smiling back at me. Her eyes looked bright. Her shoulders no longer carried invisible weight. She looked peaceful in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. I turned the frame over. Written neatly across the back were 6 simple words. She remembered how to choose herself. My fingertips rested gently against the handwriting while emotion quietly filled my eyes. "I barely recognize her," I whispered. Evelyn looked toward the lake before answering. "I do." She smiled softly. "Because she has been appearing a little more every hour since we met." I laughed through the tears and shook my head. "You always seem to know the right thing to say." She smiled. "No. I simply tell you what I already see." A cool breeze lifted a loose strand of my hair across my face. Evelyn hesitated for only a heartbeat before gently brushing it behind my ear. Her touch was light, careful, and filled with quiet respect. I did not step away. Instead, I found myself moving a little closer without thinking. My phone vibrated inside my pocket. I glanced at the screen. Another message from my attorney confirmed that the court had accepted the emergency filing to protect my property, while the investigation continued. For the first time since Daniel walked away, the future no longer felt like something I feared opening. It felt like a blank page waiting for my own handwriting. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. Some moments deserved my full attention. Evelyn looked toward the winding road leading away from the lake before quietly asking, "When this weekend ends, what happens next?" I looked across the water where sunlight now danced gently across the surface. "For the first time in a very long while," I answered. "I think I finally get to decide." She smiled without speaking. Slowly I reached for her hand. She met me halfway, our fingers intertwining naturally as though they had been finding their way toward one another since the moment a simple booking mistake quietly changed both of our lives. Together we watched the morning unfold, and I finally understood that healing never arrives all at once. It begins with one brave decision, grows through countless ordinary moments, and becomes real the first time you stop looking back long enough to recognize the beautiful life waiting patiently in front of you. 3 months passed with the quiet certainty of changing seasons. Autumn painted the hills surrounding the lake with brilliant shades of amber, crimson, and gold, and somewhere between those falling leaves I realized I no longer measured my life by the day my marriage ended. The legal process continued exactly as my attorney had promised. The court protected my property while the investigation uncovered every hidden financial decision Daniel had made without my knowledge. One by one, the burdens that had never truly belonged to me were finally lifted away. Friends asked whether I planned to return to the old house after everything was resolved. I surprised myself every time I answered no. The house had once been filled with love, but it had slowly become a museum dedicated to a version of myself that no longer existed. Instead, I sold it and purchased a small brick studio overlooking a tree-lined street, where I opened my own interior design practice under my name alone. Every wall I painted, every window I framed, and every room I created reflected choices that finally belonged to me. I also unpacked the watercolor set that had traveled untouched inside my suitcase to the cottage. My first painting was clumsy. The second was only slightly better. By the end of the month, my tiny studio walls held imperfect landscapes filled with lakes, pine trees, and early morning light. They were not masterpieces. They were proof that I had started creating again. Evelyn continued photographing forgotten towns, quiet forests, and ordinary places most people hurried past without noticing. Her assignments carried her across the country, yet somehow every journey seemed to end beside the same peaceful lake where 2 strangers had accidentally shared one cottage. Sometimes I visited her there. Sometimes she surprised me by arriving at my studio carrying fresh pastries and stories gathered from distant roads. We never rushed our relationship with promises that sounded larger than everyday life. Instead, we chose simple moments. Morning coffee before work. Long walks beneath autumn trees. Quiet evenings reading beside the fireplace. Gentle conversations that lasted long after the stars appeared overhead. Trust grew naturally because neither of us tried to force tomorrow before fully appreciating today. One crisp October afternoon we returned to the old oak tree overlooking the lake. The grass shimmered beneath golden sunlight while cool air carried the familiar scent of cedar and fresh water. Evelyn lifted her camera toward me, paused for a thoughtful moment, and then lowered it again with a quiet smile. Not every beautiful memory needs a photograph, she said softly. Some deserve to live only inside the people who shared them. I laughed gently. You have been teaching me that ever since we met. She shook her head. No, you have been teaching yourself. I was simply lucky enough to witness it. I reached into my bag and removed the wooden frame she had given me months earlier. The woman smiling beneath the oak tree no longer felt like a stranger. She felt familiar again. She felt like home. I slipped my hand into Evelyn's, and she intertwined her fingers with mine as naturally as breathing. Together we watched sunlight dance across the calm water, while colorful leaves drifted quietly around us. Looking back now, I understand that losing someone does not always mean losing your future. Sometimes it creates the space where your truest life finally begins. Healing does not arrive through perfect endings or dramatic miracles. It grows slowly through honesty, courage, forgiveness, and the quiet decision to believe that your heart still deserves another sunrise. The greatest love I discovered was never about replacing the life I had lost. It was about remembering the woman I had always been, and finding someone who gently reminded me that she had been waiting patiently to come home all along.